Welcome to the Fane of Fantasy. My name is Jesper, and as you know, this channel is all about helping you getting inspiration for mastering your craft in fantasy world building, among other things. And today I have somebody here to help me with that, and he's called Andrew, and he's calling in from all the way around the globe from Australia. So thanks a lot, Andrew, for being here and helping me with this.
Not a problem.
And we wanted to cover a topic about creating fantasy races and perhaps do it in a bit different way than you would normally think. And actually, Andrew, you're not writing fiction as such, but you're heavily involved in the role-playing aspects. And to a large degree, there aren't really that much differences between world building when it comes to role-playing and to fantasy fiction. So I think you can come with some probably good new angles and ideas on the topics here. But maybe you would start by just explaining a bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Andrew. I'm in Sydney, Australia. And as far as this sort of stuff goes, I've been writing D&D worlds and D&D missions for probably nearly 20 years, and done some quite big ones, as well as some that were just kind of my own personal ones. So the thing for writing D&D worlds is kind of that I can't fill them in. That's probably the big difference between what novelists might do and what me as someone kind of doing D&D GMing, right, game mastering, is that I can't fill in the gaps. I have to constantly leave gaps. And so I think maybe for novelists, one of the catches is that while I rely on 6 people around a table and whatever pops out of their head at whatever times to fill in the gaps, the novelist fills in the gaps past where I would kind of create. So I would kind of stop at a point, and then that leaves a space where you could then put a story. On the same score, reading people like Robin Hobb, who does these great interconnected stories, that kind of stuff is stuff that sits in the back of my head when I do my own thing. Because I mean, if you've read Robin Hobb's series, she's got about 5 series. I'm pretty sure it's she. 5 series, and each of the series kind of links in off the last one. It reads on its own, but it's not separate from the other ones, even the ones that don't involve the main cast. So that same kind of thing is a technique that happens a lot in particularly big D&D worlds, is this idea that one group can link to another group that can link to another group, and so you can have kind of stories running off each other or playing across each other. And so I've been, making worlds for years. For groups as big as 40 players at a time was the biggest group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so quite a big group. Usually, for people who aren't familiar with D&D, usually a D&D game is one person kind of playing all of the cast of extras and 4 people playing the protagonists of the story. But for this particular setting, we kind of expanded it out. So there were kind of me and another guy who were organizing the really big picture stuff, 4 or 5 other people who were then writing short stories within that as the guys running the cast of extras, and then 35 people playing different protagonists in that world.
Cool.
And kind of running that for about 2 years.
Oh,
so
wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it was a big project.
All right. So if we let's say to get on the rails towards some fantasy races here, so I know that you like to see if you can, let's say, put a unique twist or spin on it. I know that's something you are big on, and as people who have watched my videos, I always try to put spins on monsters and stuff like that as well. So that's something I like. But maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So from playing D&D, we've got kind of, to a certain extent, there's a bunch of really big kind of cultural reference and hang-up things that are in there, right? J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is like a cornerstone of stuff that goes into D&D stories. H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu is another big influence. And then kind of the last influence are those kind of really pulpy sort of action barbarian novels like Conan the Barbarian and all of those. So you've got that kind of like, you've got Howard, you've got Lovecraft, and you've got Tolkien all kind of sitting there as this kind of theme background, but they come with baggage. You know, a dwarf is 5 foot tall with a beard that finishes at his knees, loves ale, has a bad temperament, doesn't get on with people,
Yeah.
probably has a Scottish accent, right? Like that stuff, or or he's a German, right? And that's kind of all loaded in there. And an elf is tall and skinny and maybe sounds like an Eastern European, and that stuff's all sitting there, and it's become a pattern. But that means that it's great to break the pattern.
Mm.
So some ways that D&D has broken the patterns over time is that while we think of elves as kind of having that tall, slender, pale look, at various points people have deliberately created African skin toned and appearance elves. So to specifically take that kind of that physical shape that you can see in some, say, Sudanese people. Around where I live in Sydney, there have been a lot of Sudanese refugees, and they're quite tall and slender naturally. So you then just visually go, well, I'll take that look and now I'll attach it to the elf culture that I may have before. And so that little change of saying, no, elves are actually black-skinned with short, fuzzy, curly hair, and they tend to have flat noses rather than long, kind of, that kind of long Slavic sort of that it's a simple twist, but it snaps what people expect just far enough that it feels new, but it's not. People believe that it shouldn't be called an elf. It's an elf. It's just not. It's not the elf. It's It's not Arwen. It's not the Tolkien elves. And my own Twitter handle is taken from getting a tradition and then breaking it and pulling it apart and putting other things into it from other cultures. So I go on Twitter by the name of Halfling Gypsy. It's what I sell stuff on Roll20 with. And Roll20 is a place where people play role-playing games. It's get into that some other time. That's way too long. Anyway, so halflings. When you talk about a halfling, everyone thinks the Hobbit, right? Short person, furry, likes to eat lunch.
Yeah.
So what happens if you want to change what a Hobbit is like, right? Hobbits love family. They love that kind of ritually kind of eating, drinking, being with others. So keep that bit, but don't make them live in a hole. Make them want to go on the road, make them want to sail, make them want to travel, make them, instead of just being, the people that are happy to be in that hole in that corner of the world, flip them around completely and make them be like the Viking explorers who found Newfoundland. Make them like the Cornish traders out of Cornwall who were in, Spain and Italy and Portugal and North Africa all through, the 1100s. Take stuff that's in history that belongs to one culture and then find a way to basically ram it into a fantasy stereotype, a trope, and then see what comes back out of that.
Yeah, I like that, and I also think that it doesn't really matter which element you could take appearance elements, you can take culture elements, or you can take their living space, or whatever you want to do, basically. But and I also feel like you don't either have to feel overwhelmed by the fact that you have to come up with something completely unique and never seen before, because to some extent there is a value in the tropes as well, in the sense that people kind of know what it is then, and then you can just decide to twist a few of the elements to something differently.
Yeah, of course. I mean, D&D is full of really big tropes. I mean, you've got really long habits. There's an entire category of adventure that they call a funhouse dungeon, and the funhouse dungeon is basically a death trap. Like the people playing it go to play a funhouse dungeon because they don't expect their protagonists to actually live at the other end, right? The major goal is to live. If they manage to actually defeat the bad guy who lives in the funhouse dungeon, that's like a bonus. Living is the main goal, and collecting stuff is the next bit. So there are lots of these tropes. There's tall, skinny, blonde elves. There's short, cranky dwarves. There's orcs that are brutish and thuggish and pig-faced and tusked. There's, goblins are devious and this and that and green skin. And you can mess around with all of these things and do something that's quite different. And another one that's particularly D&D-ish is that only one race ever seems to have multiple cultures. So, for instance, take Tolkien. You've got humans, but there are 3 or 4 different cultures of humans. But there's only one culture of dwarves, and there's only one culture of elves, and there's only one culture of hobbits.
Yeah.
Why is that? people just monoculture the non-humans. They multiculture the humans and monoculture the non-humans. So why not multiculture the non-humans? So in one of the worlds that I've built, there are 3 different groups of elves, and they have a different naming convention. So I'm a big fan of random name generators. It saves my life a whole heap, particularly because when you're doing Dungeons and Dragons, someone might want to meet the bartender, and you haven't figured out who the bartender is. So you have 30 seconds to figure out who the bartender is. So you load up your favorite name generator site, and you go, "Give me a name," and you go, "That guy's name is Wolfer."
Yeah.
There's my new bartender. So one of the name generators that I use, I decided that one group of elves would have very Slavic names, another group would have Gaelic names, and to deliberately name everything with that kind of Gaelic tradition. So when people would, so the elves would know where you come from, right? So if you meet 2 elves and they've got names from different cultures, they would look at each other and go, "Oh, you're from such and such."
Yeah.
The humans may have no clue, but the elves know for sure that they come from here or here. And to have that thing where, why have you got, that's the other bit about D&D world building. Why do you have people not living together, right? Why did the elves leave wherever they left? It's like the ultimate backstory bit for any character in D&D is, why aren't they living at home? Why aren't they a peasant? Why did they bother going anywhere? Right? Like, it's kind of the anti Bilbo, right? Why is there a story for Bilbo? Because something happened. He reacted to something else, and he decided to not be a guy living in a hole. So you get that sort of stuff. Why is there a group over there? And explaining why they're over there may also explain why they don't have the same cultural habits, and they don't have the same names, and they don't have, all that sort of stuff. They're a different culture for a bunch of real history-like reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do Irish Celts hate Scottish Celts?
Yeah, and I like that because in one of my videos as well, where I'm talking about naming your fantasy characters, I actually kind of go down the same route as you were talking about there, in the sense of trying to figure out what do these people kind of resemble, and then give the names a certain weight to it, or way of pronouncing it that kind of associates to that kind of culture. I think that there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, and I mean, the beauty of some of the name generators that are out there, particularly for roleplay games, is that they will let you pick like a cultural group. So I could, for instance, pick towns that have a Spanish influence from Middle Europe. I could pick ancient Babylonian. I could pick whatever. So if I wanted to have just a big long list of possible names, I can just generate a whole bunch and then pick the ones out that I like. So for writers, I mean, I find it hard to come up with, because I'm doing the cast of NPCs, right? So I've got the cast of extras. I could have, in a world, I could have 700 or 800 random people. I can't think of 800 names, so I just hit the generator until I find them all.
Right.
And unless the person needs a name for a specific purpose, and naming characters specific ways can sometimes be the biggest little Easter egg for a person playing D&D. When you figure out why the character is named what they are, that can be a big kind of point for players. And I'm sure for some writer, like some novelists, they love putting that in there, right? That thing of this character has like you go for movies, right? Darth Vader, the Vader, invade, evade. It's this movement thing. And when you look at Vader as a character, he's never still. He's always traveling. So that idea of linking a name to a personality trait or so. So unless you need that, why not just, Jimbo the drunkard in the corner doesn't need a detailed name. Just ask a generator. Save yourself the hassle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And from D&D as well, because in D&D, gods are a real thing, and the things that are connected with gods are actually physically real. They're not just, a god exists, just in a little statue somewhere. It's not, that kind of traditional god that we think of. A god is actually a living, breathing thing, and in some of the versions of D&D worlds, gods can actually get physically killed. So religion has a different setup, and religion will, just like it has in our lives, affect cultures, and it will affect how the society is set up, and it will affect government, and thinking about, for instance, there's a nation in the world that I've created called Parnassus. They are overtly Greek, but the difference between them and many others is that their chief deity is a deity of strategy. Like literally, that's one of the chief pinnacles of the deity. But it's not just strategy; it's win at all costs. And so that religion has loaded into it things like it is better to, it is worse to die than it is to kill someone and win. Right? Dying is, you don't die, you murder anyone that you need to win, but you win, right? There is one objective, you win. And so having that god be a chief god in their society really changes how their society behaves. People don't blink an eye if you backstab a relative to get power, because that's how society works. People don't worry about if you burn a city to the ground, because I'm sorry, we want to win here. If this is what it takes to win, you blink your eyes and then you burn that city to the ground. There's no second thought. So how a religion will affect the culture, it's built into D&D in many ways, but if you tie a culture to the state, whatever that state might be, the state will behave very differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And the
Yeah,
same thing
and
goes on the other way around. If you have a race and you have a culture, maybe set what you want there, but then if you are to develop a deity for these people, then it goes the other way around as well, in the sense that you need to figure out, okay, so what would this deity actually be like, and why would they worship this person? So it's not just, okay, you have your random deity of life and deity of death, and you can do that, of course, but it just has more weight to it if you can make it something directly connecting with the culture as such.
Yeah, so to take one of the worlds that I've created, what I've done is a lot of D&D. What they'll say is the dwarves have their own gods, and they're just their own gods, and they're very different to everyone else's. But one of the deliberate kind of plays against that I've done in something I've most recently created is effectively to say that everyone's gods are actually the same gods, but everyone just paints them differently. So, for instance, if you take a god of, say, civilization, exploration, and construction, humans might love that, right? It's exploring, it's building, it's things humans love. We're creative. Dwarves love machinery and fortresses and that sort of thing. So while I might follow the civilization god as a human, I could go to a dwarf country, go into their temple, take a look at the thing on the wall and go, oh yeah, that's my god, except it's got a long beard and it's got, right, you know what I mean? Like it's short and it's got a long beard, but that's my god. That's just the dwarf version of my god. It's not a different god. And so to then play on how a culture is going to, what you'd say, maybe reskin the same core deity. They'll play up certain aspects and they'll play down others, and they'll change how the god looks. And you can do other odd things. I mean, one of the silly thoughts that I had recently, and I want to play with more at some point, is to change what gods of death are like. Because usually people, when they make a god of death, they have that whole Grim Reaper, dark, macabre skeleton, blah, 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 blah. And a random thought that popped in my head at one point, I was talking to someone, was, what happens if the death god is a mother collecting her children back?
Right.
And so you have this, rather than that cold, distant end, you have that kind of warm embrace, collect, hug, rest. So rather than that cold rest, you've got that kind of sensation of warmth. And so again, that comes back to that, a society that's big on mothers would potentially be big on that deity.
Yeah,
that deity
I like
would
that.
affect back.
Yeah.
Right. And so you'll have those bits where the two play against each other to reinforce or
Yeah,
break.
I was these last couple of days I just finished off reading one of Anne Rice's books. I think it's called The Devil's Disciple or some, I can't remember, whatever. But it's the vampire series,
Of course.
Anne Rice. So, and this one, she also flipped the god of death in this sense. I mean, the devil. She flipped him around.
Yeah.
So he was actually portrayed as kind of the good guy, and he was trying to explain to the Lestat, the vampire protagonist, why God was the bad guy, and he was actually trying to make things better. And it takes you like 300 pages to go through the argument of why, and it's it's a different take, and it was quite interesting in that sense.
Yeah, and I mean this other playing the stereotypes. One of the things I've got drafted and at least as an idea, and I'll get around to writing it out fully. Is a story arc that's based on flipping the usual role in Dungeons and Dragons. So the usual role is that the players are humans or dwarves or elves, and they're off and they're doing heroic things, and they're clearing the place of monsters, and the usual monsters are orcs and goblins and ogres and giants and all the rest of it. So one of the thoughts that I had was, let's flip the whole thing back around, right? I've forgotten who had the famous quote, but one man's freedom fighter is the other man's terrorist, right? That was the idea that popped in the back of my head. So I went, right, so here's the easy thing. I'm going to make the players, the protagonists, goblins. I'm going to make them orcs. And I'm going to have their homeland be invaded by humans.
By human, yeah.
So I'm going to make the humans pretend to be not humans getting attacked by humans. To put them in that different mental space where they, me just being me, they may get that sensation of what it would be like to be a people group that got invaded by a face that they find familiar. So humans would be the invaders. Humans would be the bad people trying to take over the land.
And it gives the other perspective, right?
Yeah, and that popped up, and I'm sure that other people would want to read into it, various plights of native peoples around the world, and that may have been in my head when I thought of this idea. I couldn't promise you. I think I just wrote it on a bit of paper one time and went, that would be a cool idea. I should really do that. And I'm sure, like lots of writers, I've got books with random ideas just jotted down that I'll get to one day, and it's like, that would be a good idea. I should write that down. So I think when it comes to building a world, I think the big difference between maybe what I would do and maybe what you would do, Jesper, is I have to leave space. I can't ever write the dialogue. I can tell you what the place looks like. I can tell you that the city's got 50,000 people in it. I can tell you that they do woodworking. I can tell you that they've got a drunkard who lives in the tavern over there, and the best thing that you can do is let him sleep, because if you wake him up, he will beat the living snot out of you for waking him up. And the only thing that's worse than doing that is getting the barkeep to wake him up, because he will beat you harder when she wakes him up. I can make that, but I can't ever tell you, what's hero one going to say to hero two.
No, of course.
And I can't pick who's the hero of the story. So I think the world building stuff is similar. It's just that you guys writing novels do that extra bit beyond and fill in all the little gaps, whereas I kind of have to build the signposts and convince people to follow the story that I want them to have. That's the other one, as I can't make them go. I've just got to kind of go, hey, this sounds interesting. Maybe you should go here.
Yeah, and I was also thinking while you were talking there, Andrew, that if we initially we said this thing about perhaps taking some of the familiar tropes and turn them on their head and stuff like that for our races, but then maybe the other thing is that, of course, you can let that play out through culture and everything else as well. But I was just thinking about, do you have any good ideas when it comes to the cities and the structures themselves, in terms of how do you let that play together with the race and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, so any cultures, my background is very sciencey, so I tend to look at cities from a very mechanical, logistic point of view. It sounds stupid, but that's kind of how I do it. So I will find where it fits in the landscape. I need it to have a water supply. I need to have this, that, and something or other else. But then kind of on top of that, if it's on a borderland, it's likely to be invaded, or people are going to be paranoid. So it'll have castles, it'll have heavy walls, it'll have fortifications. People there will be more likely to have weapons or be trained with weapons. They'll have a stronger garrison. Maybe their resources nearby will lend it to something. So, if you've got a town that's near water but right near a forest, then they're likely to be woodworking, because that's a resource right nearby. If they can manage to woodwork well enough, then that'll become their thing, and they'll get known further afield for that. Just kind of like real life economics. I mean, Venetian red's called Venetian red for a reason. Cerulean blue is cerulean blue kind of for a reason. So we can steal those bits of information, the way that societies play out kind of in real life,
Mm.
go through that bit of history and then think, well, if I have a city that, you know, I mean, I don't know necessarily the geography of Europe especially well, but, you know, if you have a city that's right near a certain resource, it's going to get known for that, and other places will want to trade with it, and so you'll be able to get cultural influence from this other place or this other
Mm.
place or this other place. My own background is from Cornwall, and you know, so if you don't know where Cornwall is in England, I don't know how well it's known over there, but you just kind of imagine England, and the long skinny bit that points out towards the Atlantic is Cornwall. And in Cornwall, they have a dessert which is basically a croquembouche. But if you ask the Cornish what it is, it's not a croquembouche. They
Mm-hmm.
do, no, no, no. But if you look at it, it's made exactly the same way. So where did they pick it up? How did these people in Cornwall get it? Well, they sold tin to the Portuguese and the Spanish and the French and the Italians, and they took home terracotta from the Italians, and they took home shoe pastry from the French, and they took home, you know, this from the Spanish and that from the Portuguese. And so there's all these little bits that sit in their culture, and so that how does, you know, how do you avoid monocultures of things? Well, ironically, trade is a great way. So if you can explain why a trade happens, you can explain why a city happens. From what I remember, the city of Venice is caused by a problem. Um, People wanted to avoid, I think, I've forgotten whether it was the Romans or they wanted to avoid someone else. Anyway, they got chased from their usual living space out towards this swamp next to the ocean. Well, if you've got nowhere to live, you can't go back where the invaders are, so you figure out how to build a city in a swamp. So why is there a city in a swamp? Because we had no other option.
Mm-hmm.
I have a city called Helwenmore. It's in a swamp. It's in a swamp because that's right next to the only major river that leads to the ocean. Someone's got to build. Yeah, if you want to trade on the river, you've either got to ship it all the way from inside the city, all the way from inside the
From the
country,
country. Yeah.
along the rivers, or you've got to figure out how are you going to build a city in the middle of a swamp right next to the river. And so it turns up because there's kind of a necessity. There's an advantage to doing it. If you take Robin Hobb's Rainwild Chronicles, she has cities in rope bridges way up trees in a swamp because the practical reason is because the water at the bottom of the forest will eat everything alive, right? It just dissolves everything.
Mm-hmm.
So why are there people there? Because if you do get down to the bottom there, there's valuable stuff buried in the mud. So you want to find the stuff that's valuable in the mud. It makes you good money. It's worth being there to get it.
Yeah.
But your
And it
city is now
allows for some
shaped
good
by the
protection
fact,
as well.
yeah, but the thing is that your city is now shaped by the fact that you can't build it on the ground. You have
Mm-hmm.
to build it 50 feet in the air up amongst trees.
Yeah.
And so what society looks like and how it behaves and what's important to that society changes purely based on that alone. Water, you would have to collect it. You couldn't have a well. So there won't be aqueducts, there won't be water systems, there won't be. That changes how that city behaves. It changes how the people behave. It changes what the city feels like.
Yeah.
You know, insects, as stupid as it sounds, a city like that will be full of bugs. Mosquitoes will be a problem. Malaria and plagues like that could be a real genuine plague. And
Mm-hmm.
depending on how your fantasy world deals with what magic can do and what gods are likely to do, the idea of a blood-borne plague could be a great start for a story, and it could be a great kind of kicker to get a hero to leave home,
Yeah.
right? Which is
Absolutely.
kind of like that's kind of the thing that you always have to do in D&D is why do these people leave home?
Mm-hmm.
Why do
Exactly.
they
And
become the heroes?
yeah.
What's the MacGuffin?
And that's where you can anchor your kind of tension in all of that as well. I mean, for example,
Yeah,
if water is all of a sudden valuable, then that'll be something that people will have conflicts about. Maybe
yeah,
there's only one access route to your water, so people will try to
yeah,
block that or
exactly.
one way or another
Tax.
control it.
Yeah. If you go for another D&D one, there was a setting called Dark Sun,
Hmm.
and it was a very different one to all the rest. So a lot of the rest of them had that very kind of European bravery, knights, Pendragon, Tolkien kind of feel. And then I think in the 90s, Dark Sun appeared, and Dark Sun is very different because in all the other ones, everyone could be Merlin and nothing would happen. But in Dark Sun, what's happened is everyone's used too much magic, and whatever it did with everyone using so much magic, it's caused magic to eat the life of things around it. So when
Right.
you're a player and you're using magic, you literally desiccate the land around you. You destroy plants and make it sandy and barren, and things will not grow there anymore. So if you want to launch the cliched fireball or the big lightning bolt or whatever, the catch is that an area around you you've just made infertile to life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that simple twist on what magic does in a world changes how everyone interacts with magic. A wizard is now a really dangerous thing.
Yeah.
People won't like wizards.
And it
Wizards
changes the whole culture and all of that.
yeah. And so European fantasy, in that classic European fantasy, a wizard is looked up to. They're a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if now you've got someone who, to deal with an enemy, has to destroy a field for the next 6 generations, that's a very different prospect. You don't really love that person anymore. They're almost a necessary evil.
Mm-hmm.
And twisting those simple assumptions in quite small ways can have that big track out when you track it through what the culture is going to do and how they feel about things. Having a god of magic that's evil. As much as I know that your writers are writers, one of the things that has become a big thing in the D&D world is podcasting people playing D&D. And one of the most famous ones at the moment is called Critical Role. I don't know if people have heard of it, but effectively it was a 3-year-long game run weekly for about 4 hours that involved a bunch of voice actors doing D&D.
Okay.
And at the end of their 3-year arc, they got to the point where they literally came into a direct conflict with an evil god of magic. They fought that god literally in physical combat. And all sorts of epic things happened. But one of the most epic things is that one of the characters was effectively condemned to death. At some point, another godlike character would appear and claim that person's life. It's a standard bit that turns up heaps in all sorts of literature. And one of the players had a wish spell, like rubber genie on a lamp kind of wish magic. And that hit a point in the game, and the guy could either keep the power to cast the wish spell later and save his friend, or use that power to ensure that the evil god would lose the battle.
Mm-hmm.
And that pure moment of tension, it's great. It's what D&D is about as far as writing. But I mean, for you guys as novel writers, think of leading to that point. You've had a 3-year-long, 4-hour-a-week story arc that culminates in fighting a god. And the biggest tension is not, do they beat the battle? The tension is, can this guy win the battle and condemn his friend? Or does he lose the battle to save his friend?
Mm.
And right there. And if people watch it, you can find it on, I think, Twitch and maybe on YouTube as well.
Okay.
Critical Role is the name of it. If you find it, the guy who plays that character, there is a moment where this is also still a story. This is people pretending to be imaginary people. This guy literally looks across at his friend across the table and apologizes and breaks down crying from the emotion of this decision that he's making, right?
Mm.
To literally condemn his friend's imaginary person by choosing something with his imaginary. So tensions and stuff that's in those worlds, it's big in D&D. We just don't do the detail. We don't get to that. We don't get to those points.
No, of course.
But we strive. We hope like heck that they turn up. We really do hope they turn up.
You get to those points by the collaboratory storytelling, whereas when we write, I just, let's say, do it myself. But it's essentially the same thing we're striving for, but just in a different delivery model.
Yeah, and so that thing of I have to leave space. I can't. I can put people into town, but I can't tell you what they say until I sit down and do it.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. We are also coming up on time here, Andrew, but time is flying because it is so interesting to talk about this stuff.
Not a problem.
But maybe, do you have any places where people can find out more about you if they want to follow along with you, what you're doing and stuff like that?
So most of what I'm doing at the moment is on Twitter. I've been thinking of getting into putting up a blog, and there's some projects that I'm thinking that in the nearish future I'll probably kickstart. But I want to get an editor to look over a 55,000 word draft because it might need a little editing. And so at the moment I'm on Twitter as Halfling Gypsy, just at Halfling Gypsy, and I mention all sorts of stuff. And one of the things that may help with some of your writers is I do map commissions as one of the things I do. So, people give me an idea of what they want their world to look like. All those things that turn up in the front of a novel that tell you that bit of geography. As a D&D guy, geography tells me way too much about how things will work in the world on a nation, on a city, on a personal basis. And I know lots of other GMs kind of think and feel that way. So, as much as it seems stupid, your stories have a place, and that place will impact them as much as anything else. You don't have Lord of the Rings if you don't have two big towers. You don't have the dwarf strongholds. You don't have the big ring mountains. That the story needs that stuff as much as anywhere else, and where those things all are to each other is important. And sometimes having a map is what makes it quite obvious. And so, having that sort of thing, I know it helps GMs. It'll probably help writers if they want that there. And with my old 9-to-5 job being a high school science teacher, I kind of know how geography should kind of look from a very sciencey kind of viewpoint. Yeah, I try not to get too angry when people put their rivers and mountains in the wrong places or have horrible tectonic plates that can't possibly work. But look, if people wanted, that's where they can find me. They can ask crazy questions. They can harass me, follow, tweet at me, all that sort of stuff. Cool. I try to get that around, being a wife and a dad to 2 kids under 5.
Yes, I know the feeling.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, guys. And if this is your first time here, then do remember to subscribe so you can get more good fantasy stuff related videos every single Monday. And thank you, Andrew, for joining today and talking about fantasy races.
Not a problem.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.